Welcome back, everybody. Derrick Soo, your 2022 Oakland mayoral candidate. Well, we've seen a lot of things happening here in just the recent past. Invasion of Ukraine. We've seen just recently, in fact, this morning, we saw another 13 cents a gallon rise in gasoline prices. And so just locally right here, I'm already looking at $6 a gallon for gasoline. And fortunately, I don't need much. I just need 5 gallons for 2 weeks because I have my solar. Only time that I'm actually needing to run the generator is early morning before the sun comes up. But now with daylight saving time kicking in this weekend, that's probably not going to be a problem. And late into the evening, sun will still be up much later. Yeah, this is the time of year that I really like the solar. And speaking of which, we heard that PG&E is expecting at least a 16% rate increase, and that's what they're asking the PUC for in a meeting today. And so we're seeing electric rates go up, gasoline going up, worldwide instability in the oil supply right now because the United States was getting approximately 10-11% of its oil from Russia, which we saw Tuesday night. President Biden said, no more, we're not buying any more Russian oil. So that's going to put a little hurt on us, and we could see, like in the city of Gorda, if you ever been to Gorda is down the coast, Highway 1. I've been there, and it's the only gas station for nearly 20 miles in each direction. And so you're going to pay their price, and then also, since they're an outstation, they also have to burn diesel to just operate that small outpost, which has a restaurant, the gas station, and a hotel. And they have a petting zoo there with llamas. Like I said, I was there a number of years ago. So gasoline could be seen at $8 by summer. And so that's a big concern, because that's going to cause a lot of problems here just getting to work, because we're hearing all sorts of folks spending $100 just to fill up their tank. And if you're having to come in from the valley, you're doing that on nearly a daily basis. So pretty soon that job that was paying pretty well is not paying enough to get you to work. So anyway, I've been through this, and that's one of the things that I want to bring up. The candidates that we have here in the Oakland mayoral campaign, a majority of them are too young to understand the economic dynamics of what's happening, and then be able to look at the information that's necessary to make the right choices. I've been through all of this. I started back in high school when we have Jimmy Carter, who took the presidency. We had an immediate OPEC oil crisis that took place. So when I started driving, the price of gasoline was 63 cents, almost 64 cents. The next 30 days, it increased by 50%. It was 83.9, so 83, almost 84 cents. And then shortly after that, it went over $1. In fact, there were a lot of times when we were seeing $1 to $1.25, and I think at the peak I remember seeing $1.49, and it was years. It was literally years before the price came back down. And so what a lot of folks did, they changed their jobs so that they would work closer to home, or they changed the way they commuted to work. A lot of folks went from the car to public transportation. That's where BART really came in handy and saved a lot of people that way. Also, we had Caltrain and Amtrak running, so a lot of folks were doing that. But also, we didn't have the high amount of folks living in the Bay Area like we do right now. And so myself, I stayed within 30 minutes of where I was living, and 30 minutes was the limit I set on my commute. And so that kept me pretty close to home. I had a gas-thirsty car at the time, which was a 1975 Chevy Monza. It was a limited edition with a 305, so it was not light on gas, and I got rid of that for a sports-oriented car again, Z28. Bought a 79 Z28. What ended up happening with that? I was only getting 12 to 15 miles to a gallon out of that car, and that was unleaded gas was still fairly new. Catalytic converters were on every vehicle at that time, smog emissions, and the horsepower on these V8s, a 305 V8 back then only had somewhere around, if I remember, my Z28 had 165 horsepower, 185 horsepower. That was pretty pathetic for the time compared to the cars that I was running just a few years earlier back in high school. But everybody started at right around 1976 when OPEC was at its peak. People were buying economy cars, and that's where Honda really made its inroad. Toyota made its inroad, and at the time Datsun, before it became Nissan, made inroads into the American market, because the American market, number one, the cars were big, heavy clunkers. They drank a lot of gas, and they cost a lot of money. These lower cost imports that were coming in the early and mid 70s. One of my school buddies, his family bought him a brand new Toyota Celica. I believe it was the GT, because he had the racing stripes on it. It was a cute little car, a two-door, sporty, and back then that little sporty car cost $4,000. So that was a brand new car from Toyota at the time. And here's the kicker: while I was getting between 12 and 15 miles to a gallon in my Monza in my final year of high school, my friend was getting 30 to 32 miles to a gallon in his Toyota. And so shortly after I left high school, went into the work world, I needed to have something that was very cheap to get to work. And so I bought myself a motorcycle. In fact, if you go back and look on my Facebook page, you'll see pictures of my motorcycles. I had a Yamaha RD400 1977. I bought that brand new from Berkeley Yamaha back in 1978. It was a year-end clearance. Then in 1980, while my dad was finishing up the purchase of his motorcycle for his commute to work, I traded in that RD400 and bought 1979, a clearance 1979 Kawasaki KZ1000 Mark II. Very limited edition. Great bike. It was a huge step up in terms of comfort, and gas mileage wasn't as good as the little 400, but I tell you what, that 1000, even with the engine racing kit in it, still got 35 miles to a gallon. So I could still play and have fun with speed and acceleration. It was entertaining, and it was still cheap fun. Nowadays, we have gas, like yesterday was $6 a gallon, just short of $6, $5.89.9. So we're just short of $6 yesterday. I'm sure because what was being done overnight, we saw a 13-cent increase across the board, and so I expect everything to be over $6 at this point. And then, so one of the things that you can do, move closer to work or change your work. change your mode of how you commute to work. Could be public transportation, AC Transit, BART, Caltrain, Amtrak. Those are the public transportation that we currently have. And then we also have the ferry. If you live in a city that is next to the water, it may have a ferry terminal, because right now ferry system is under an expansion. They were going to add in 5 new stops for the coming decade, and so those are additional cities that are going to be included for the ferry service around the bay, because they're finding that it's a really good need. And that's funny, because back in the day, it was in the 60s when ferry service actually completely stopped on the bay, and it was deemed by the professionals back then that ferry service will never make a return, and it was done, and it was over. So, but yet we have the ferry service back and going stronger than ever. So that's an option for public transportation for folks. But we all have to tighten our belts. We know that inflation is going up. We have very low housing supply. So what I tell a lot of folks right now: don't buy a home. Do not buy a home. Don't listen to what's being said in the media about your opportunity to buy is now, because that's wrong. They're suckering you in, and don't do it. Wait. I advise everybody, wait 2 years. Let's see what's going to happen, because every war, every conflict has caused the U.S. economy down. So we're in a downfall right now. It'll start kicking in pretty soon. The more interest rates go up on housing, the fewer people, or more people, are taken out of the market just on a 0.25% interest rate hike. We lose at least 10,000 applicants with just a 0.25% interest rate hike. So, and then on top of the high price of the homes, don't do it. I was the fool back in the 80s. I had FOMO like a lot of people have right now, which is fear of missing out, because the same thing was being said about the real estate market back in the 80s, and it was a terrible market. There was very few homes for sale. We had, going through the Jimmy Carter years, we had one of the biggest recent recessions at that time going. And then folks were losing their homes. They had overpaid for their homes in the 50s, and then the decline in the housing purchases, because we had things going in the 60s and 70s that were not good. We had the Vietnam War going on. Then also the end of that, we had the decoupling of the gold from the dollar from the gold standard, which was by Richard Nixon, President Richard Nixon, 1971. And then we had I'm not a crook. And then that set the country into a big tailspin, and we had inherited President Gerald Ford, and he was the Republican that took over. He was vice president at that time. Then when 75 came in, 1976, Jimmy Carter was elected president. He took over, and things just went in real bad. And then we had Ronald Reagan come in right after Jimmy Carter. We had a lot of bombings and terrorism that rose and affected our military, killing a lot of our people overseas, and that affected our economy. So there were a lot of influences back then that are very similar today, just that the faces are different and the places are different, but the circumstances still have the same influence. And so we all have to tighten our belt, because we see inflation rising, or interest rates rising on home mortgages, inflation is rising, cost of goods and services on the raw material level are rising. Shipping costs have more than doubled in many cases. So we have a lot of the same influences going on from the 70s up through the late 80s. I've lived through them. Very few folks have lived through that, and especially, you know, the candidates in our Oakland mayoral race right now, they have not been through this. I'm one of the few folks that are one of your candidates for this mayoral race that has been through this, and I have answers to resolve a lot of the issues. We can't do anything about the inflation and the high interest rate because that's out of the control of the city mayor, but there are influences that we can put in place to help folks get by. This is also a great time to start a home-based business. Cookies, Girl Scout cookies is kind of an influence, kind of like that. Back in my day, people were doing a lot of small business startups. This is where technology really came into play and influence. So in recessions like what we're about to see here in the near future, that I've also been saying is coming, these are suggestions that as a person who's been through really hard times, we'll get through these hard times coming up together. I'll help with the suggestions, and I'll back it up with real information and data as to why some of those different businesses or opportunities that present themselves can be of great benefit to you. But right now, first thing I would tell everybody, get out of buying the house, because the market's going to tank. I saw it from the 50s into the 60s. Not so much that I was around in the 50s, but my dad told me about the market and how there was a rush of people buying homes. But unfortunately, there was something called redlining, and so people of color were excluded from a lot of that housing boom. And then when it went bust during the 60s, that's when housing became affordable for the masses, and some people were able to, but again, redlining and discrimination and racism still played a really nasty part on a lot of what we're about to see and we're going to experience again. So thanks for joining me today, and we'll see you on the next time.